This is a video about functions in Julia, and we're going to cover some very basic things about Julia's functions. So here in this first cell, we go over how to declare a function. This is one way it can happen. So usually functions are multi-line blocks, and the very last statement, the result of that, will be returned by the function. So if I go ahead and execute this cell and write this function into memory, it tells me here, a generic function with one method. And to call it, I'll just pass in some values for x and y. So in this case, 2 and 4. And this would give me exactly what I expect. 3 times 2 is 6, 5 times 4 is 20. The sum of that is 26. Another way to declare a function is, and that's very neat in case you have like a one-line definition, is to just write it out like this. You don't need the function word, you don't need end, you can just write it like this and you have exactly the same function. If I run the exact same numbers, then as you expect, same numbers come out. Now in both of these above cases, it was kind of implicit that the very last line is returned by the function, but you can also just kind of make that explicit by doing whatever calculation you are running, and then instead of just running result as the last line, you can include that return word, and that gives you exactly the same kind of output. Now a little bit on type declarations. So you can in Julia declare types of, for example, the function output. So in this case here, you can do that by specifying that the return of your function should be an integer. And so if I do this here and input this, and it all works out that 3 times 1 and 5 times 2 happens to be an integer 13, it will return you this as a type of integer. Now if I check the type, here it is, an integer 8. And now this is kind of something that doesn't do an automatic conversion or casting for you. So for example, if I run this with float numbers, now my result I expect to be of float, and this will give me an error here, right? It cannot cast into an integer 8. If I wanted to do that now, one thing I could do is just rounding the result, right? And then again, I would be getting an integer result with this method. So now another thing to do is one can actually also give type declaration of the input parameters of the functions as well as the output. So that's what I'm doing here. All of these are float 32s, and if I run all that, then I can run this, right? So now note that these are a little bit more than type hints in Python, right? These actually, as I showed earlier, right? These really enforce that you have these types going in and coming out. So this is something that that helps you to declare what kind of types a function expects and returns. Another thing you can do with function is to return multiple return values. Here in this very small function, I'm returning the input a as well as a double of the a, and if I run this function, meaning I bring it into memory, and then if I run it, I get a tuple as an output, right? The result of just a as well as 2 times a. And I can just naturally decompose that just like I would do any other decomposition. And in this case here, well, it displays the tuple, but I can actually now refer to as the individual items of the tuple as R1 and R2. And that's the same as just kind of going into that output tuple and going to index 1 or index 2. Another thing you can do with functions in Julia is to assign default values, and that makes then arguments optional. All right, so for example, let's say in this little polynomial function that I have here, I have my x, and then I have my 3 coefficients, x0, x1, and x2, corresponding to coefficients before the quadratic, linear, and constant or zero term. And by doing that, I have this function you see here. It actually tells me 4 methods, and that actually means it expects that you can run it with like a different number of arguments here, right? So I can just use all the defaults and just provide an x. That would be this one here, and that gives me naturally a 0 because all the default values are 0, and so the return is 2. Now if I provide the first variable here, the x0, then what I would expect is that I get exactly that constant back, because everything else is zeroed out. And if I set that constant term to 0 and the linear term to 100, then I expect now to get the result 2 times 100. So this is this coefficient here. And the fourth method that I have defined here is by basically providing all 4 values. And just for demonstration purposes, I'm making this simply a quadratic function with the quadratic coefficient being 100. And so I would expect that this gives me the value 400. So this is overview of functions in Julia. This is something very basic, how to run them. I will go deeper into what else you can do with functions in the future videos. For now, I hope you've enjoyed it, learned something, and I'll hope to see you in one of the next videos. Thank you.